Hi. We also need to talk in our discussion about blood typing. We need to talk about this Rh factor. And I know you guys have read about this as well. Rh factor is just another type of antigen. And in our discussion earlier, we had the round shape of the A antigen, we had the triangle shape of the B antigen, and you could really think about the Rh factor as just being another shape, and sometimes it's referred to as the D antigen, just so you know that. So anyway, if somebody had a blood type of, let's see, let me ask you this. What if the blood type looked like this? What would that blood type be? Well, there's the presence of A antigen shapes, and there's the presence of Rh antigen shapes, so this person would be A positive. So when we're talking about Rh, we simply talk about a positive or a negative, and that's where that idea of positive and negative comes from in blood types, just so you know that as well. So that's the basic information about Rh and how that plays into our blood typing. There's a particular situation that can be really difficult related to this Rh blood type. One of the quick things I need to explain is that the anti-A and the anti-B antibodies are pre-made in our bloodstream. But remember, I said in the last video that normally our immune system has to be exposed to a foreign substance in order for us to build up the attack against whatever that antigen is. So Rh falls into that more normal category. We have to have exposure, so exposure required for antibody production. So we don't have the Rh antibodies just floating around in our bloodstream. So here are a couple of things that are important to know. This is a scenario that matters a lot when we have a mom who is pregnant with a baby, but it's only if the mom is Rh negative and she happens to be carrying an Rh positive baby. Here's the reason why. So if mom is Rh negative, that means that Rh is foreign to her red blood cells, because her red blood cells don't have Rh on them. So if it ever got exposed to red blood cells that had the presence of Rh, that would be really strange. So that would be foreign and something her body would actually need to fight off or fight against. So normally, here in this structure right here, this is the placenta. I think that's what they're trying to show in this diagram. In the placenta, that's where you have mom's blood coming in, and you have baby's blood coming in, but they are joined, or separated I should say, by a membrane. So the mom's blood cells and the baby's blood cells don't ever mix. Oxygen goes this way, from mom to baby. CO2 goes from baby to mom. So we have the exchange and the transport of nutrients and gases and all these things that matter so much to the baby across that membrane of the placenta. But we don't have the passage of red blood cells across the placenta. So normally that shouldn't happen. However, if something happens where the mom gets injured or the placenta starts to tear during the pregnancy, or even during the time of delivery, where the placenta has to actually separate from the lining of the uterus, there can be some escape or leakage of red blood cells from the baby's body across that placental break and into the mom's bloodstream. Now remember, we said that antibody production takes, in that last video, about 7 to 10 days to really even show up. So if this is happening during delivery, what's happened to the baby in that 7 to 10 days? The baby's been born. Baby's a week old. Baby's totally outside of the mom's body. So even if the mom begins to produce these anti-Rh antibodies in her bloodstream, there's no baby there for it to affect. So baby number 1 is fine. So baby number 1, if the baby is Rh positive, And if the blood cells leaked across the membrane, then the mom would actually have had this exposure, and she would now be producing anti-Rh antibodies. Now, baby number 2 comes along. If baby number 2 is Rh negative, is there anything for these anti-Rh antibodies to bind to? No. So if baby number 2 is Rh negative, that baby's fine. But if baby number 2 is Rh positive, this is when we have a problem. Because these antibodies are actually small enough to cross through the placenta. We said that blood cells don't really cross through the placenta, but these anti-Rh antibodies are typically small enough to cross that placenta, which means that these antibodies are going to start to bind to the baby's Rh positive blood cells. You can see that in this figure here. And when that happens, we actually lead to agglutination in that baby's blood supply. And that's going to damage the baby's blood cells, which means the baby's blood cells can't transport oxygen the way they're supposed to. This can have mild effects depending on how many antibodies cross, or this can have major effects, and this is called hemolytic. So lytic means to rupture, so a cell rupture. Hemolytic disease of the newborn. And that just means that this Rh positive baby number 2 has actually had its own blood cells attacked by the antibodies that the mom made in response to baby number 1. If you have questions about this, please let me know. It can seem a little complicated, but it's a really great example and an application of how these antibodies function in our body.